Says I'm live. Here I am. Welcome. I'm Kristen. I'm the Island Free Library Director. The Island Free Library is on Block Island. I am in the library on Block Island, and welcome to our daily program of short stories for adult listeners. We run this program every day. It's generally live at 3 p.m. It's a chance for, hi, Dad. It's a chance for family and friends and patrons to stay connected to the library and for us to stay connected to you. And really just a chance to share some writing together, some literature, some stories, all kinds of different readings here at this program. Every day is different. I shouldn't say that, right? Sometimes I repeat authors. You know, I definitely have some favorites. I have some favorite books. In fact, I'm reading a favorite today. I'm going to read something today. Yeah, he's a favorite. We'll just go right to it, right? So this is Frankenstein Tea. I'm Kristen. This is the Island Free Library. I'm going to read Ron Rash today. This is a brand new book. I just bought this for the library. Of course, obviously, I was buying it with this program in mind. It's a book of short stories, but we have other Ron Rash in the library. He's over at the other part of the table. I read Ron Rash. I think I read two, if not three, Ron Rashes. One was, you know, the woman at the pond and the young kid is fishing. He rows out and she says, come back, come over here. And she goes out and they have a little discussion, and it's a flashback, right? That guy is at that pond in the current, which is when he's older and they're draining the pond. And anyway, that was a Ron Rash. What was the other Ron Rash that I read from that book? Not sure. He writes here's a review. Rash's spectacular stories may originate in the peculiar soil of Appalachia, but their reach and their rewards are vast. That was an NPR Fresh Air review. So, Appalachia, definitely rural, poverty. I read not during this program, but I've read other stories of his that were like really lots of like methadone stories, disintegration of towns and families from methadone. Those were rough. That was a rough collection of stories he wrote. But I'm going to go for one today. I'm not sure either which one I'm going to go for, because I did just get this. We did just get this book in. I just grabbed it from the shelf. Can you imagine my coworkers were going to let this go out when we need it here for this story, for this program? But so I read two just sitting here. Jeepers, which ones did I read? And boy, they're good. Oof, I could read a few of these, but wait, I'm going to read, I thought I was going to read one, but I'm not going to read it if I can't find it. Let's see. So how are you? How's everybody out there? Everybody doing good? Oh, this is what it's called. I didn't know that this was the story with what it was called. Okay, I found a story. I have two. Which one am I going to do? I think I'm going to do this one. Oh, it makes a reference to Friday afternoon, so why not, right? It's Friday afternoon. I was reading something the other day, and it was about Thanksgiving, and I thought, no, save this one. Let's hope I can find it at Thanksgiving. Okay, so this collection by Ron Rash says, In the Valley, Stories and a Novella Based on Serena. So I'm not reading the novella today, although maybe I'll take it home and read it and see if we can get through it. Maybe we'll read it over a day or two. Maybe, we'll separate it. But it's published by Doubleday, just published 2020, brand new in. This short story, can you see that? When All the Stars Fall. Let me take one sip of water. Hi, Cahill. Cahill liked yesterday's story, so it encouraged me to go a little, get in there a little. That's why I got Ron Rash today. A little serious, here's some serious short story here. When All the Stars Fall by Ron Rash. There had been no shade as they built the dock, and though they wore sunscreen, the skin between shirt and ball cap had been burned to the color of brick. Brent and his father rubbed calamine lotion on their necks each night, but the skin remained tender to the touch as if branded. But now it was after 5 on Friday afternoon, and the dock was nearly done. Would have been done, Brent knew, if someone other than his father had taken the job. They'd have already packed up their saws and drills, gone up to Mr. Hewitt's house to get their check, and be sipping a beer at Mac's Bar and Grill. Instead, the old man had checked everything up top and now waded into the water to confirm that every post was meticulously secured. Only then would he and Brent walk the shore to ensure no wood chips or screws littered the ground. Even if they never notice, it has to be done right, his father always said. Which was why, despite Brent's protestations, the old man would hand a client a piece of notebook paper with an itemized cost of materials and labor. If the price was agreed on, his father asked for nothing more than a handshake. Several times, the job, once begun, took more materials and labor than anticipated. When that happened, he explained the situation, but left it up to the owner to decide on additional compensation. Having worked 10 years with his father, Brent was no longer surprised at how often those with the most money balked at paying extra. Such customers also searched intently for some flaw on a completed deck or dock. If they were insistent enough, his father dropped the price a few dollars. Not as much as they'd like, but enough to stop their complaining and write the check. Brent's father waded out of the shallows, the black mag light held overhead like a torch. He rolled his pants above the knees, and in the day's declining light, his legs glowed in their paleness. Unlike his muscular arms and shoulders, his legs were thin, each footstep tentative as he waded ashore. Even after a second surgery, the right knee gave way at times, part of the price for countless hours kneeling on wood and concrete. "Looks good," his father said, so they checked the shoreline and packed the last of their tools into the pickup. They were glad this job was done. Mr. Hewitt had a reputation as being hard to work for. A royal pain in the ass, a brick mason had told Brent and his father. Jerry Funderburk, who worked at Lowe's, swore he'd quit the store before going to Hewitt's house again. So Brent and his father had been warned, but since the recession, carpentry work was scarce. Too many days they waited at home for the phone to ring. Brent even working part-time at Hardee's to make extra money. He and Leslie had been talking about having a child. Yet how could they when the two of them together barely made each month's rent and car loan? But it was Friday, Brent reminded himself. The job was done, and they had work for next week already lined up. In a few minutes, they would stop at Mac's for a beer before Brent's father dropped him off. If they weren't too tired, maybe he and Leslie could drive to Silva to rent a movie. Hewitt was on the lake house's back deck, which was no surprise, because he'd been there often during the week. He'd come down to the dock every day. "I'm just wanting to see how far you got," Mr. Hewitt would say, but his eyes always searched for something more. "You're certain those are the right board length?" he'd ask. Or, "Will those screws hold securely?" They were questions tinged with accusation. Brent's father answered, Yes, sir. But after Hewitt left, he'd muttered, "That man knows as much about dock building as a cross-eyed cat." Mr. Hewitt came down the deck steps with a checkbook in his hand. "I want to look it over first," he said, and they followed him onto the dock, the boards firm beneath their feet. Farther up the lake, a red sun balanced on the hydro dam. A cool breeze swayed the cattails, and Brent thought how nice it would be to sit out here with an ice chest of beer as the last jet skis or boats went in. All you'd hear was water sloshing softly against the posts. "It's a pretty view," his father said, looking out at the lake as well. "Maybe so," Mr. Hewitt said, "but this railing's too high for the dock to be safe for a child." "You didn't say you wanted it lower," his father answered. "You didn't say a word about children." "A professional would consider something like that and consult the client, don't you think?" His father's face burned as if he'd been slapped, except Brent knew a slap would sting less. "You were out here yesterday when we began putting it up," Brent said. "You should have said something then." "I wasn't looking that carefully," Mr. Hewitt answered. "I assumed you knew what you were doing. I'll pay you half of what we agreed on." The breeze that had bent the cattails ceased. The water stilled as if the lake itself now listened. Brent looked at Mr. Hewitt. What did he know about this man, besides that he was wealthy and from some place where you could make enough money to own a vacation home worth $500,000? "It'll take another day," his father finally said, "but we can lower the railing where you want it." "And listen to more of the racket your saws and drills have made all week?" Mr. Hewitt answered. "I bought this place for the peace and quiet. No, I'll have it redone sometime when I'm away." "It's not right," Brent's father said. "We've done good, honest work for you." Mr. Hewitt set the checkbook on the railing, took a pen from his shirt pocket, and wrote out the check. He held it out to Brent's father, who stared at the check as if it were smeared with dog shit. "This is what I'm paying you," Hewitt said. "You owe us the full amount," Brent said, "and you're going to pay it. Look, if you got a problem, we can take this to court, but you'd better take the check and be on your way, because if my lawyer gets involved, you will end up with nothing." His father took the check. "We'll call us a lawyer first thing in the morning," Brent's father said when they got in the truck. "There's got to be some that work on Saturday." "It won't be worth it, Dad," Brent replied, looking out at the lake. "A lawyer will cost more than what Hewitt owes us, even if we won. Like I've been telling you for months, this is exactly why we need to make out real contracts, to protect ourselves." "There's lawyers that take a case for a percentage," his father said. "You see them on TV all the time." "Not for this small an amount." "There might be one around who'd do it that way," his father said, "just for the principle of the thing." "It doesn't work that way," Brent said, trying not to sound exasperated. "Why don't we skip Max this evening? We'll do it next Friday." "I don't feel much like stopping myself," his father agreed, then as much to himself as to Brent. "I don't understand how anyone can act that way and still sleep at night." They didn't speak again until the pickup pulled into the driveway. Brent got out and took his lunch container and circular saw from the back, then walked over to the driver's side door. "I'll see you Monday, Dad." "Why don't you and Leslie come to church Sunday?" his father said. "Folks there have been asking about you all. Afterward, you could come to the house for lunch. That would tickle your mom. Besides, I've been craving banana pudding, and she makes it only for you." "We'll see," Brent said. Leslie was already home, but he didn't go straight inside. Instead, Brent put the saw and lunchbox beside the shed and sat in the swing the previous renters had put up. He'd quit smoking 2 years ago, but he wanted one bad right now. How can anyone act that way? His father had asked. Brent had known Rucky Lunsford since first grade, a pale, pudgy boy who carried around an inhaler for his asthma. Ricky had been the kid in elementary school who never got chosen when teams were decided. There had been some teasing a few times he'd been shoved or tripped, but Ricky never asked a teacher to intervene and earned a bit of respect for that. He'd retreat to the playground's far corner at recess. In high school, Ricky sat alone at lunch. Just ignore me, he made clear. Do that, and I'll ask no more of you. But one day, in the 11th grade, Brent paused at the table where Ricky sat. You don't need this, Brent said, and took the piece of pizza right off Ricky's plate before walking on to where his friends were. Brent did that for 2 weeks, taking something. Pizza, a hamburger, a carton of milk. Never a whole plate, just one thing. Ricky never tried to stop it. He never said a word, just let it happen. By the second week, Brent didn't bother to put what he took on his plate. He carried the pilfered food to the nearest trash can and dropped it in. If a teacher hadn't seen what was happening, how long would he have done it? Not much longer, Brent wanted to believe, but he'd never know for certain, because one afternoon the principal called Brent's parents. That evening, he and his father went to visit the Lunsfords. Brent had never seen where Ricky lived. It was a trailer with rust bleeding down the dented tin, concrete blocks rising irregularly to the front door. Inside, it was clean enough, but the furnishing spoke of yard sales and cast-offs. Brent felt remorse, but it was his father who apologized to Ricky and his parents first. For my son to have done this, I've failed as a parent, Brent's father told the Lunsfords. Anything I can do to set it right, I will. The least we can do is pay 2 weeks' worth of Ricky's lunches. His father had taken out his billfold and offered a $20 bill. Mr. Lunsford refused the money, but he and his wife accepted the apology. Mrs. Lunsford even made light of it, saying it was just boys being boys. Ricky and Brent shook hands. There had been no other punishment, but on the ride home, Brent's father had said he wouldn't have believed Brent capable of such a thing. Words left hanging in the dense silence. Brent still saw Ricky around town, but they kept their eyes down if they happened to pass each other. Maybe if he had not been drunk, Brent wouldn't have set the fire. It happened on the following Tuesday night, the day after his father had given up on any kind of litigation. They were building a deck for a retired dentist from Charlotte. They'd done jobs for the man before, and he paid without wrangling over the price, as his father reminded Brent when he insisted they not take another job without a contract that a lawyer had double-checked. At least a contract for people we don't know, Brent argued, but his father hadn't replied, and Brent knew there was nothing left to say. That night, he and Leslie watched a movie, but afterward, when Leslie went to bed, Brent didn't follow. He'd drunk 3 beers, his usual limit, but he got 3 more from the refrigerator and went outside to sit in the swing. In a few minutes, the bedroom light went off, but the porch and living room lights still shone. Moths swirled around the porch's bare bulb, but the rackety air conditioner displaced the night sounds. 6 months back, Cam Beecham had offered to sell this house and 2-acre lot, but Beecham was asking $1,000 more than the county appraisal. Brent and Leslie had believed he would lower his asking price, but there'd been no new offer. Brent finished the 5th beer, crumpled the can, and tossed it to the ground. He tightened his hands around the bright steel chains, swayed back and forth a few moments. When he and Leslie had moved in, Brent had noticed that the grass wasn't worn beneath the swing set, put up and left as if a taunt. His mind went to the dock and stayed there. When Brent was growing up, his father would point out how a plumber in Silva had done shoddy work but then gone out of business, or how a county clerk embezzled money for 3 years but ended up in prison. "It catches up with you, son," he'd say. But plenty did get away with it, Brent knew. All you had to do was look at the recession, which almost caused him and his father to lose everything. The silk-tied crooks who'd done it weren't arrested, and no one pretended they ever would be. People like that got away with anything. Get caught robbing folks, all you had to do was pay back part of what you stole. Turn 1 million people into drug addicts, you didn't spend a day in jail. Brent threw the last can into the weeds and went to the shed for the gas can and a flashlight. The matches were in the escort's glove compartment. He didn't switch on the headlights until he reached the end of the driveway and turned onto the blacktop. Leslie had the radio tuned to an easy listening station, so Brent stabbed the buttons until something loud and relentless pulsed the speakers. He pulled off the road at the end of Hewitt's Drive and walked down to the lake. The moon and stars were out, and he hardly needed the mag light. All was dark inside the house. Brent soaked the planks and railing with gasoline and stepped back on shore. The first match went out, but the second caught. Flames sprinted across the wood. Smoke rose and began obscuring the stars. When Brent got to the car, he saw a bright yellow tongue lapping the water. The next morning, he was in the shower when Sheriff Honeycutt knocked on the door and told Leslie he needed to talk to Brent. "Just a matter that needs clearing up," Sheriff Honeycutt answered when Leslie asked why. He waited outside as Brent dressed. "I called your dad and he's meeting us at the courthouse," the sheriff said when Brent came out on the porch. "Aubrey Hewitt's already there. That dock you built him was set on fire last night." "And you think I did it?" Brent asked. The sheriff raised his hand, palm out, as if he might halt a car. Hewitt thinks it, either you or your father," Honeycutt answered, lowering his hand. "I'd say there's plenty of folks wished they'd done it, including fishermen who bring their boats into that cove. Hewitt calls me and Willie Boast at Fish and Game complaining about them. Like Willie says, the man buys 2 acres of waterfront and thinks he owns the whole damn lake." Hewitt and his father waited on separate sides of the courthouse foyer. The room was otherwise vacant, and as the 4 of them walked across the worn marble to Honeycutt's office, their footsteps echoed. "All right, Mr. Hewitt," the sheriff said once they were all seated. "Have your say." "They burned my dock down last night." "We done no such thing," Brent's father answered. "Maybe you didn't, as far as being there," Hewitt said, "but your son did, and you know he did it. As I told you over the phone, Sheriff, that boy made a threat. You're going to pay for doing this to us. Those were his exact words." "He didn't say it that way," Brent's father said. "He said..." But Sheriff Honeycutt raised his hand. "Let's just deal with who set the dock on fire," he said, and looked at Brent's father, then Brent. "Were either of you near Mr. Hewitt's dock last night or in a boat on the lake?" "We don't even own a boat, and we weren't around his dock," Brent's father answered. "You've known me long enough to know my word's good, Sheriff. You'll not find a man in this county who'll tell you otherwise. Same for Brent." "I've never had cause to disbelieve anything you've told me, Dale," Honeycutt said, turning to Hewitt. "Even if he's telling the truth, that doesn't mean his son is," Hewitt said. "He's the one that threatened me, and I haven't heard him deny anything." The three men settled their eyes on Brent. "What do you say, son?" Honeycutt asked. "I didn't set that fire," he answered. "I didn't even leave my house last night." "He's lying," Hewitt said. "If you call me a liar again," Brent said, "I'll give you real cause to hire a damn lawyer." "There's no cause for talk like that from either of you," the sheriff said, standing up. "I'll go up to your place and look around, Mr. Hewitt, but unless there's some material evidence that can be tied to these men, there's no cause to charge them. You didn't see anything such as a gas can on the bank, did you?" "No," Hewitt replied, "but isn't that your job?" "I just told you I'll look around," Sheriff Honeycutt answered tersely. "We know these men's footprints will be down there, but if someone else's are, that might help me find who did this. But my guess is whoever it was came up by boat, probably one of those fishermen you keep harassing. You need to accept that as long as they stay in their boats, they can come as close to your property as they like." "Talk to them then," Hewitt said. "I gave you and the wildlife officer their boat numbers. Somebody had to have seen something. The way that dock was burning, it looked like the whole lake was on fire." "I'll check with Fish and Game about any boats that might have been in the cove last night. If not, this isn't likely to get solved." Sheriff Honeycutt paused. "You know, Mr. Hewitt, you'd be doing yourself a favor by being less confrontational with people." "So," Hewitt bristled, "it's my fault the dock was burned?" "I'm just saying it might prevent something like this from happening again." "That's good advice the sheriff's giving you, Mr. Hewitt," Brent said, meeting the man's eyes. "Next time, they might set a match to your house." "There's no need for that kind of talk, son," Brent's father said, but the apprehension now clouding Hewitt's face made Brent think otherwise. "You do this investigation right, Sheriff," Hewitt said as he stood. "I've got friends in Raleigh, people you're familiar with." For the first time since he picked Brent up, Honeycutt smiled. "Well then, tell them hello from me, Mr. Hewitt." "Sorry I had to bring you two in," the sheriff said after Hewitt left. "I never believed you all would do something like this, but I had to go through the motions." "We understand," Brent's father answered. "You can take Brent home, can't you?" Sheriff Honeycutt asked. "Of course," his father said, and the two men shook hands. As they walked out of the courthouse, Brent watched his father's tentative steps, remembered how pale and vulnerable his father's legs had looked last Friday. They were halfway home before Brent's father spoke. "That must have been a sight, a dock that long burning," he mused. "There's a lake of fire in the book of Revelation. Preacher Orr was telling of it just a few weeks ago." Brent's father paused and gave a slight smile. "Of course, that lake is one you'd not want to be there to see, would you?" "No, sir," Brent answered. They turned off the main road and soon passed Mac's Bar and Grill. A single pickup was in the driveway, probably left by someone with the good sense to let a friend drive him home. Brent's heart quickened as he thought of how easily blue lights might have appeared in his own truck mirror last night. "I expect you're feeling it's time for you to go out on your own," his father said. The words were spoken in a matter-of-fact way, neutral in tone. Brent looked at his father's face, but it revealed nothing. "How so?" Brent asked. "Business." "Not you and me?" Brent answered. "Just the way we do business?" "It's one and the same." "It doesn't have to be, Dad," Brent said. "No, for me it does. You're young. You and Leslie want to have a family. I want you to have that too, and a place of your own without fretting each month about whether you can pay the mortgage." "We can work together," Brent answered, We just have to change things to make sure we don't get screwed by assholes like Hewitt. No, I'll be working only a couple of more years, his father replied, so I'll stick to my old ways. You sure? Brent asked. You're better suited for how things are now, his father answered. I've known that for a long while. He glanced over at his father, but the older man looked straight ahead. There was nothing else to say. Soon Brent was thinking of the standard contract he'd have a lawyer ensure was airtight. Other things would be changed too. He'd cut some corners the way most builders did, jack the price up on material estimates. If he did these things, maybe it wouldn't be too long before he and Leslie did have a child and their own house. His father made the last turn. The swing set came into sight. Almost new, not a speck of rust, as if waiting for a child. Brand new book by Ron Rash, printed by, it was Doubleday, right? Published by Doubleday, New York, 2020. In the Valley is the name of the book, and that story was called When All the Stars Fall. Thanks for coming to Frankenstein Tea. I hope you enjoyed today's short story selection. As I said in the intro, Ron Rash he's one of my favorites, discovered recently for me within the last few years, but I do read a lot of Ron Rash. So I hope you enjoyed that. I as I said in the beginning, also, I did read more than one this morning to choose for this program. And I have to say, I'm still thinking about the other one I read. So maybe we'll do that tomorrow. We'll see. Have a great afternoon. Stay safe, stay healthy, wear your mask, wash your hands, keep your social distance, 6 feet apart, limit your contact to 15 people. I think you're supposed to know those people. I don't see 15 people at a time, so I haven't really paid much attention to that rule. But I know the governor has all that information on a website if you need to, figure out what you can and cannot do for the weekend, if your weekend has plans. Other than that, enjoy it, right? Just take this for what it is, a quiet time for yourself. All right, everybody. See you soon. Peace out.